I'm going to pull up here a little. And as he said, I find as I've been going around that almost nobody I speak with has heard of the Willie McGee case. And it was very famous for a brief period. It played out between 1945 and 1951. And it was primarily set in the city of Laurel, which, as you know, is in South Mississippi. And a lot of the action in the case took place also in Jackson, particularly. And then a lot of it also spread because over the years the case became more and more of a news story that was covered all over the country and even all over the world. And I'm going to pass out what these are some printouts of a slide presentation that I'll sometimes do. And if you just want to glance through these, I'll clip them together, excuse me. You'll see various examples of how prominent people, especially in the last couple of years of the case, became caught up in this as a cause that they wanted to speak out about. So some of the people who became advocates for Willie McGee and the idea that he was innocent of the crime he had been charged with: Albert Einstein, Jessica Mitford, Josephine Baker, William Faulkner got involved, and I'm going to read you a portion of the book that he stars in. Julius Rosenberg, the atomic spy, was very interested in it. And by the end, people all over Europe and the Soviet Union and China were being really drenched with propaganda and news stories that pressed the idea that Willie McGee had been framed of the crime he was charged with. And the specific crime was a rape charge, and it all started several years earlier than 1951. It started in late 1945, and the original incident began just after dawn on a Friday in 1945 in Laurel, Mississippi. A woman named Willete Hawkins came running out of her house screaming and barely clothed, saying that she'd been assaulted by an African-American man in her bedroom, and she was in this bedroom with a 2-year-old girl, her daughter, who was sick. So the story she told was that, and McGee, as I'll tell you, had a very different story to tell. But what she said was that she and her husband had been up most of the night trying to get this sick baby quieted down and sleeping. And then at some point around 4:30, she decided to send her husband to the back of the house so he could get some sleep. And she and the baby went to bed in a bedroom in the very front of the house. She turned the lights off, and according to her, the next thing she remembered was coming to and hearing the sounds of a man crawling on the floor. And she couldn't see this person, but she could hear him, and she could smell alcohol. And then the next thing she knew, this man was on top of her with threatening to kill her and this child if she so much as made a sound. And then he told her what he was there for, which was sex. And according to her, she submitted because she believed that she was strong enough to overpower her anyway, and that if she hadn't submitted, he would have killed her and maybe the rest of her family. So according to her, this rape happened, and the man ran out the front door, and she said she couldn't see him. It was too dark, so she was never able to identify him by sight. That was pretty important subsequently. But she said the only way she knew that he was African American was she could feel his hair, and that it was, typical of an African American male. And he was a very strong guy, and he did this without, much struggle from her. So that was the starting point of it. And the next day, a doctor came to see her. She was taken off to the city of Hattiesburg and put in a hospital for a couple of weeks. And McGee himself became a suspect because he worked in Laurel as a driver of a wholesale grocery delivery truck. He went around in a truck taking groceries to little stores and groceries and restaurants. The story presented against him at the trial that subsequently happened was that he had, on the Thursday preceding this alleged rape, he had done his deliveries and collected about $15 in cash, and then didn't come back to the home office where he would have, under normal circumstances, he would have parked the truck, turn the cash over to his boss and then be done for the day. Instead, according to the police and prosecutors, he took that money and went on a little joyride around the county with a couple of friends of his who were also African American males. And the story told was that they went and visited bootleggers, and he was supposedly looking for his ex-wife who lived out in the country somewhere. And allegedly he drank several half pints of whiskey throughout the night and ended up in a couple of private homes in Laurel where there were card games and dice games going on. So he was supposedly gambling and drinking this whole night. So the case they presented was a circumstantial case based on testimony from friends of his that he had been out drinking and he sort of ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. The two friends who were with him said they parted company about 3:30 and that he went off on his way. And the story went that he drove his truck through the part of town where this woman lived, drove down her street and saw her in a window, through a window, just sitting there, and the lights were still on. And allegedly it occurred to him, like, there's a woman in there by herself. I'm going to just park this truck and crawl in through a window and do my thing. So that's supposedly what happened. Now, McGee was arrested the following on Saturday in Hattiesburg. There was a warrant out for him primarily because he was accused of having stolen his company's money by not coming back from his deliveries that day. But when they arrested him, it seemed like they had decided, based on investigation that the local sheriff had done, that he also might have been the person who committed this rape that had been reported. So he was collared on Main Street in Hattiesburg, taken into the jail in Hattiesburg, and no doubt beaten up. That was just the way it was back then. If you were a black male and you were accused or suspected of the rape or murder of a white person, you were likely to get pretty rough treatment by your immediate handlers. So what McGee, for a long time, he didn't say a word. For the first 3 years of this case, he never uttered a public syllable about what had happened to him. But it finally came out in he had 3 different trials because his first 2 trials were reversed by the Mississippi Supreme Court on technicalities, like that there should have been a change of venue. But when the 3rd trial rolled around, McGee was able to get it together enough and testify. And what he said was that the moment he was arrested, the arresting officers started beating on him and accusing him of raping a white woman. He denied it. They threw him in a car and said, here's what's going to happen. They were driving from Hattiesburg back to Laurel, and he said, there's 2 roads. One leads to Laurel, and if you want to go there, we're going to hand you over to the people in that town, and they'd like nothing better than to get their hands on you. And he knew exactly what the police meant by that, which was they were going to hand him over to a lynch mob, and he would never be seen again. So he was terrified by that. He was a pretty tough guy, but as he knew, if you were thrown into the hands of a lynch mob at that time, it was only going to end one way. He would have been killed, and he probably would have been tortured. There had been pretty vicious lynchings in that part of the state in the 2 years previous. So he was pretty frightened about that. So according to what he testified to, he said he confessed because he was under the threat of lynching. What happened after that, and this was pretty standard practice back then, instead of taking him and leaving him in the Laurel jail, he was taken to the Hinds County Jail in Jackson, which was a big 5-story building. That if you've ever been to Hinds County, you know it's a big structure and it looks like a fortress. And in a lot of the cases from back then that happened in towns all over the state here, if a black male was arrested for murder or rape, they didn't leave him in the town. They took him right down to Jackson for their protection, because the top 2 floors of that courthouse had jail cells that were considered to be safe from attacks by lynch mobs. So McGee was taken right off to that jail, and most of the time that he was arrested and incarcerated, he was actually in Jackson and not in Laurel. He was only taken back to Laurel when it was time for a trial. And when he was there, he was usually there briefly.